So what you mentioned around, household work, I want to delve a little bit deeper into that, because obviously, I think you were referencing some of the OECD data that came out, looking across many countries in the world, and um, despite the fact that India is on the tail end of that distribution as extremely unequal, even the most equal countries, quote unquote, the Scandinavian countries, some of the Western European countries, still you find a clear difference in a clear, unequal apportionment of labor in the household. So, even in those countries, it's the case that women are doing sort of more of the, household tasks. Do you have any thoughts on the sort of, historical or, evolutionary origins of that? Like, is that a norm that, you know, society has had across the world forever? And is there some sort of reason for that? Or, um, you know, are we arbitrarily assigned women, to do more and have just stuck at it?
I mean, I'm not an expert on that kind of prehistory, but apparently it started when agriculture started, where as long as there were hunter gatherers and nomadic lifestyles, women and men were apparently fairly equal partners. And now, of course, there's that discovery of the bones, which is a little bit the evidence is controversial, but it shows that women were hunters too.
Yeah.
So in the hunting gathering societies, it's not like women were just sitting at home waiting for the man to bring the kill. They were also going out and hunting. But with
Yeah. Yeah.
agriculture, with settled lifestyles, and given the biological, the fact that biologically women give birth, and so there are times in their lives when they have to be,
At
uh,
home.
homebound or whatever it is. I mean, so I think that agriculture, I mean, if you believe the Marxist view, then it's really the private property and beginning of all that, which made these gender divisions very, very rigid. Whatever
Yeah.
it is, but whether you believe that or not, but the fact that this male breadwinner model, where the man is supposed to go out and provide for the food on the table,
Right.
and if the woman has to go out, it's seen as if the man is not capable enough. And that's the source of this shame or the social stigma, which you find more clearly articulated in India. But all I want to say is that it's not absent from other parts of the world as well. And people may not say it as in that way, but the fact that a woman's income is secondary or her achievements are secondary. I mean, just yesterday, this Wall Street Journal article, which made fun of the First Lady's PhD and called her kiddo. I mean, this tendency to
Right.
demean women's achievements and not
Right.
deny, not not recognize just the abilities of women as equals.
Right.
This is, I think, much more deep rooted than we would like to believe. So even though appearances are different, and the language might be different, and the way in which it gets operationalized is different, but
Oh
you
yeah.
do find, when I read that Wall Street Journal article, it was unbelievable to me.
I love.
But at the heart of it is, if you are a woman and if you have a PhD, how good it can it be? you
Right.
know and in
That.
India somebody will just say it out loud, whereas in America it causes a shock, because how could he say that, right? But many
Yeah.
people think that. So I think what you said is absolutely right, which is when a surveyor comes to the household and says, who are the workers in this household, because women's work is undervalued
Right.
or
Right.
not valued at all, you would say, well, she doesn't work, you know
Right. Right.
and there is a stigma because of this male breadwinner idea, that the man is somehow lacking or deficient if the woman is compelled to go out and work, except that women do work all the time. The household businesses would not survive if women
No.
didn't work in them.
And I think even taking a step further in that direction, I mean, I've experienced this, very much in my own personal life with the pandemic, and many people have that. Essentially, you realize when schools stop and childcare stops and all that, that there's an incredible amount of household work that has to take place for any productive work to happen, right?
Exactly.
And this is one of the main arguments for sort of tamping down the virus because we know that people aren't being as productive if they
Yeah.
are having to take care of their children and elderly people who need attention, etc., and other responsibilities in the house that are taken care of either by hired labor or by traditionally by women
Mm,
in
mm,
these households. So taking a step beyond this, I think there's a growing recognition that perhaps even the way that we define labor force participation
mm.
should it's a little bit arbitrary, right? Because we're
Yeah.
just saying what is the actual productive work that's being done. That's all that's counted. But that productive work wouldn't be possible if you didn't do the other underlying responsibilities within the family. And I think so in a broader definition you would consider things like cooking,
Mm,
cleaning, gathering
mm,
water, childcare. All of those things are productive activities.
mm,
uh, so in that respect, you'd also see quite a huge increase in participation of women in productive work if you
mm.
counted those things as productive.
Yeah, no, I mean, so in places like India, whether the household, like the domestic chores are counted or not, that's a larger debate. But even if you just take the standard
Yeah,
accepted system of national accounts activities, just standard
right.
stuff, even if that got counted, which is what we do in our work on West Bengal,
Even
you
that has a
see,
huge
you know,
implication, right?
40, 50 percentage point difference in terms of measurement,
Yeah, yeah,
and so I think that's one. The other is things like, I mean, I think India is going through a period of sort of, I would have called it jobless growth if there had been growth, but last few years we haven't even had growth. But there was a time when we had jobless growth, whereas now you don't have jobs and you don't have growth. So that's another issue. But the fact is that in rural India, avenues for paid work for
hmm,
both men and women are very, very hard to find, especially for women. The only kind of jobs that they do is school teacher, the frontline health workers, the contact, the ones who are the shining examples today of
that's
in
something. Yeah,
COVID times. But basically, there are very few possibilities of
yeah,
paid work in rural areas. And because transportation between villages and cities is very poor, a woman, how will, even if there's a job in the district center, how is she going
right.
to get there? How is she going to come back and take care of the kids, etc.? So unless there's work in the village, so in
Mm,
fact, all the surveys, National Sample Survey, all of these surveys, when women are asked about would you work if work was made available either at home or close to home, there's an overwhelming yes to that question. So
right.
there's a huge unmet demand for work. I
Absolutely.
think everybody focuses so much on the supply side story that we forget that there is
Right.
an issue of demand, that women want to work, but there is no work available.
And I mean, that's a great point. And I want to ask you more about that. And something that Good Business Lab and my own research we care a lot about. And part of the reason is because you know if we think that there's some sort of unreachable, uncrossable barrier that's set up by gender norms or social stigma, etc. Um, and those things are extremely deep rooted, and we got to go back to hunter-gatherer evidence
Mm,
to find their origins. I mean, that all sets up the idea that if that's the case and that's the major problem, we're going to have a big problem changing that
mm,
with policy, right? I mean, that might take many generations
mm,
to unfold. Whereas, you know, the kind of less talked about but potentially very impactful avenue for policy to go is thinking about labor demand. Like you said, um, I think in some areas, particularly in rural areas and in particular states, where you find maybe that the density of villages is lower, etc. It's much harder for women to get access to paid, economic opportunities. And so, actually, a lot of the work that we're doing in this space at GBL centers around this, just to highlight some of our ongoing stuff. So, what you mentioned about having access to economic opportunities in your own home is really crucial, and I think also kind of interacts with this social norms idea around household labor, because women often find that even just stepping across the transom and going to some place in their village is sort of impractical because of the other household responsibilities they have. They have to cook their family's dinner. They have to wash clothes. They have to look after their children who are roaming around near the house. So all of those things make it such that the propensity for women to sort of travel anywhere, even if it's within the village, is lower. So we actually did a bunch of pilot experiments around this in Karnataka, and what we found was really fascinating, that when we gave women an economic opportunity, it was something very simple around making bracelets or making a quilt. They took it up to a much greater degree when they were offered the opportunity to stay home and do it. And overwhelmingly in the pilot data, that was because they were able to, sort of multitask. They were able to, have a pot of rice boiling and be looking after their children, and then meanwhile they're making a couple of bracelets. As opposed to kind of, the same activity, if you gave a woman the opportunity to do that in the middle of the village, she was less likely to take it up. And so I think there's some very important, work that both the public and the private sectors could do in this space by expanding supply chains into rural areas. Then you basically give women that opportunity with, the time and the talents that they have to get access to this work, which I think there's a high latent demand for in some areas of the country. So I think we're planning a full-scale experiment in that vein soon. So the verdict is still out, but I think there's very promising evidence that if you're able to sort of reach into rural areas and indeed reach into homes and actually offer opportunities to be productive inside the home, that has huge implications for labor force participation. So completely agree with you there.